Number 6. ATACMS. Since the beginning of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, Ukraine has been asking the United States for the Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMS. This is an American-developed long-range surface-to-surface missile system that's known for its accuracy and its ability to carry different types of warheads. U.S. President Joe Biden initially rejected the request, citing fears of escalation, but he and other officials began to change their tune during the summer of 2023, as Ukrainian forces pushed against the remaining Russian strongholds in the country as part of a prolonged counteroffensive. Sending the ATACMS would potentially be a great way to bolster the effort, which will require sustained assistance from other countries if Ukraine stands a chance at winning the war against Russia. As of September 2023, Biden has clarified that a final decision on whether or not to send ATACMS to Ukraine will come soon. One official even confirmed to CNN, off the record, that the approval has pretty much already been given. Number 5. HIMARS. From the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky appealed to other countries for longer-range weapons than his military had at the time, emphasizing how the country was outgunned by Putin's forces. The United States responded to Zelensky's call in June of 2022 by sending a high-mobility artillery rocket system, or HIMARS for short. And since then, the U.S. has given Ukraine at least 20 HIMARS systems, manufactured by Lockheed Martin. The HIMARS is a long-range wheeled rocket launcher that was first developed for the U.S. Army during the 1990s. This all-weather system carries a single launch pod that's capable of firing a 6-pack of satellite-guided rockets or one ATACMS missile. Mounted on a 5-ton truck, the HIMARS is capable of firing rockets with a 50-mile range. And to put that into perspective, that's farther than any of the weapons that were previously available to Ukrainian forces, enabling troops to launch both close and long-range precision strikes. The HIMARS has been a powerful asset to the Ukrainian war effort. At first, the system was primarily used for targeting Russian supply lines and ammunition dumps. But in July, the Ukrainian military attacked the Antonivsky Bridge in the city of Kherson, effectively cutting thousands of Russian troops off from their only supply line. Then, in late 2022, Ukrainian commanders began targeting an increasing number of barracks and other places containing concentrations of troops, including a hotel that was housing members of the infamous pro-Russian paramilitary force known as the Wagner Group. Then on New Year's Day, dozens of Russian service members were killed in an attack carried out by a HIMARS system. The Russian Defense Ministry said that 63 service members died, while Ukrainian officials estimated that the casualties were in the hundreds. In July of 2023, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry announced that the military had destroyed a battery of Russian self-propelled howitzers in one fell swoop using the HIMARS. Drone footage showed troops scattering after multiple explosions went off that sent large plumes of smoke into the air. The HIMARS has provided a considerable boost to Ukraine's gun power, but it's been more successful in some regions than others, and its initial momentum eventually slowed. Its effectiveness has been further challenged by Russia's use of electronic jammers to thwart GPS-guided rockets, but the HIMARS has proven to be an important fixture in Ukraine's war effort, and experts have predicted that this and other long-range weapons will remain essential in the fight to recapture Russian-held territory. Number 4. Mikel Gorbachev. Mikel Gorbachev became the Soviet Union's 8th and final leader in 1985. He was praised by Western leaders for helping to end the Cold War through his efforts to reform and modernize the USSR. In reality, though, Gorbachev was committed to preserving the Soviet state, but he believed that significant changes were necessary for its survival. So he encouraged private businesses by reducing state control over various economic sectors, promoted free speech, including the ability for civilians to criticize the government, and implemented a more democratic political system. And this included competitive elections and the introduction of multiple political parties beyond the ruling Communist Party. Gorbachev was most controversial for his open-mindedness toward nuclear disarmament and his willingness to negotiate peacefully with the West. At the time, both sides had a common goal in mind of ending the Cold War. However, his reform measures had the unintended effect of contributing to the Soviet Union's downfall, something he never wanted, and something that Vladimir Putin wishes never happened. Putin heavily blames Gorbachev for the Soviet Union's collapse, so much so in fact that when Gorbachev died in 2022, he offered little more than a brief, emotionless announcement. He extended his condolences to Gorbachev's family but didn't personally attend the former leader's funeral. In polite terms, Putin believes Gorbachev was guided by the naive vision of a new romantic period between the USSR and the West. It could perhaps be said that his anger over the fall of the Iron Curtain fueled his dogged pursuit to become Russia's leader. Some experts believe that Putin's resentment over the Soviet Union's collapse has driven him to try undoing Gorbachev's legacy. It was definitely a factor in his decision to invade Ukraine, and it's unclear if or when he'll ever give up on his apparent goal of restoring the Soviet state. Number 3. China's growing power. Putin's 15-year career with the KGB began in 1975. And during that time, the Soviet Union was one of the world's largest economies, second only to the United States. The USSR essentially controlled the entirety of Eastern Europe, including Poland, Ukraine, and East Germany. At the time, China was embarking on a new era of financial growth with the introduction of reforms aimed at modernizing the country and expanding its economy. Its goal was to maintain many of its socialist values while becoming an industrial nation. China was also a lot poorer back then, and it relied heavily on Soviet technology for the construction of its factories. But a lot has changed since then. China has since elevated to the status of a global superpower and is currently the world's second largest economy. Meanwhile, Russia now relies on Chinese technology, and its economy is a mere fraction of China's. It's as if the two countries have traded places. Today, China's global influence only continues to grow, while Russia is struggling in its attempt to take over Ukraine. Russia and China have good relations on the surface, but some experts have speculated that there are fears among Russians of Chinese encroachment on the country's territory and the influence on its culture. It's unclear how these factors will affect Russia's approach toward relations with China in the future, but it's logical to predict that at some point, the country's close relationship could cool off. Some experts believe that Russia might adopt a policy of avoiding entanglement in alliances with other countries, while others think Moscow will seek closer relationships with other powerful countries to bolster its own strength. However, it hasn't happened yet, and all anyone can do for now is speculate about the future. Number 2. NATO. Vladimir Putin has repeatedly blamed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, better known as NATO, for the ongoing violence in Ukraine. And surprisingly, not everyone disagrees. Many journalists and experts, including those in the West, have pointed at NATO expansion for essentially pushing Putin off the deep end and triggering him to invade Ukraine. These allegations have also been used to explain other actions taken by Moscow, including Russia's invasion of Georgia in 2008 and a previous invasion of Ukraine in 2014. But this narrative is flawed. According to international relations expert Robert Persson and former U.S. ambassador to Russia Michael McFaul, they argued in the Journal of Democracy that NATO's expansion hasn't happened in the form of a constant encroachment on Russia's borders like Putin wants people to think. The pair claim that Moscow's complaints about NATO typically come after instances of democratic expansion in Eurasia, which doesn't necessarily have anything to do with NATO. More specifically, Putin's fear of Ukraine joining NATO is thought to be a motivating factor for the ongoing war, since the alliance will not admit a country that's partially occupied by Russia. In this hour-long speech announcing the invasion, which he referred to as a special military operation, Putin accused the United States and NATO of pursuing global dominance. He made it sound like Russia had no choice but to intervene in what he described as the West's attempt to impose its anti-Russian views and agenda on Ukraine. In reality, Ukraine wants to be a democracy and wants to join NATO. Persson and McFaul have argued that even in the absence of a NATO expansion, Putin would continue trying to undermine democracy in Ukraine and elsewhere throughout the region. In the past, he's had mixed reactions to Eastern European countries joining NATO. And in some cases, he seemed completely unbothered by the idea. But when NATO announced plans to possibly admit the former Soviet republics of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania as new members in 2002, Putin said that Russia was in no position to tell others what to do. He also said that they couldn't forbid other countries from making certain choices in the name of national security. And yet, he sung a completely different tune whenever a post-communist country has made a major democratic breakthrough in recent years. For example, when the Rose Revolution ended Soviet-era leadership in Georgia in 2003, Putin took measures to interfere with the country's democracy and ultimately blamed NATO for his decision to invade in 2008. Today, Russia's continued occupation of Georgia's Abkhazia and South Ossetia territories ensures that the country won't be admitted into NATO. Furthermore, relations between NATO and Ukraine have changed very little since the beginning of the current war. Even before the invasion, NATO made it clear that Ukraine didn't qualify to join, although the alliance remained committed to keeping its door open to the possibility. Looking at it from this angle, it's hard to deny that Putin is motivated solely by a desire to stop NATO from sinking its claws into Russia's neighbor. Number 1. Internal dissent. Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, Russian citizens who oppose the conflict have been unusually outspoken about their views. Thousands of civilians have voiced their opinions and participated in demonstrations at the risk of being jailed and otherwise punished. It's no secret that free speech isn't on Vladimir Putin's list of favorite things, and the heavy-handed response to those who dare speak out against him isn't the least bit surprising. But there are limits to his ability to silence those who dare to disagree with him, especially when it's done in large numbers or from a position of power. Putin learned this lesson the hard way in June of 2023, when a man he once considered a close confidant staged a rebellion in Moscow Oblast. The revolt was led by Russian oligarch Yevgeny Prigozhin, who owned several businesses that directly served the Kremlin. In addition to his close friendship with Putin, Prigozhin was tightly connected to Russia's defense ministry and its military intelligence agency, the GRU. He also founded the Wagner Group, a state-funded private military company that supported pro-Russian militaries in Ukraine since 2014. The Wagner Group played a significant role in the 2022 Ukraine invasion and the violence that followed. Throughout that year alone, the force grew from roughly 1,000 members to somewhere between 20,000 and 50,000 members, and it was still under Prigozhin's leadership when he began openly criticizing the Russian military's handling of the war. Prigozhin became increasingly brazen in his complaints over the following months. He expressed anger and frustration with Russian forces for failing to provide the Wagner Group with ammunition and blamed the military for the deaths of several of his men, which he believed would have been prevented if they had been better supplied. His anger eventually turned directly toward Russian officials and their families for their alleged shortcomings in the war effort. Throughout 2023, Prigozhin began rebranding himself as an advocate for the populace rather than an ally to the elite. And in late June, he refused to sign paperwork that would integrate the Wagner Group into the Russian military and remove him from the leadership. He also declared war on Russia's Ministry of Defense. During the short-lived rebellion, which lasted for just 36 hours, the Wagner Group captured the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don and began advancing toward Moscow. The mutiny was quickly squashed, and by then, the friendship between Prigozhin and Putin was over. Prigozhin agreed to move to Belarus in exchange for criminal charges against him being dropped, but he died in a suspicious plane crash in late August, while en route from Moscow to St. Petersburg. The Wagner Rebellion revealed cracks in Putin's control, which many people already knew existed. But Putin and his top officials go so far out of their way to conceal any shortcomings in his power that they're often not visible on the surface. Many noticed that Putin seemed worried while delivering a speech about the rebellion. And in the words of Politico journalist Daniel Fried, he seemed to be preparing the country for civil war more than assuring his fellow citizens that this was just a mutiny by a ragtag bunch of mercenaries. The fact that members of the Wagner Group managed to capture an entire city with ease, and their ability to come within 124 miles of Moscow before being stopped, undermined Putin's image as all-powerful. And now that it's happened once, there's no reason to think it couldn't happen again. But more than anything, the rebellion reset the image of Putin as a mere mortal rather than an infallible force of power. For many, this is a reassuring realization, but for Putin, it's likely terrifying. For now, he continues to stubbornly cling to the narrative that he has things under control and that he has the unwavering support of the Russian people. Do you think that Putin is scared that another Wagner Group rebellion or one like it could be on the horizon? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.